ladies and gentlemen, it's now my really great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lee Schwartz. Lee is Chief Geographer of the United States and holds the position of the Director of the Office of the Geographer and Global Issues in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. He's the State Department's 9th Geographer, a position that was established in 1921, and he bears statutory responsibility for providing guidance to all federal agencies on questions of international boundaries and sovereignty claims. He has a PhD from Columbia University with a focus on political and population geography, and he also oversees the Humanitarian Information Unit, a US government interagency organisation focused on unclassified data coordination for emergency preparedness, response and mitigation. Would you please welcome Dr. Lee Schwartz.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I want to first of all thank the organizers and the hosts for inviting me, QUT and SIBA, and especially my friend Tim Forsman. I don't even see Tim. There you are. Tim has really been quite a visionary in the field, going back to the days of Digital Earth and the startup of GIS Corps and Google Earth and numerous other initiatives that are related to his work in humanitarian response and disaster relief, and even as Richard mentioned, saving polar bears. So thank you, Tim, for inviting me. I first became acquainted with Tim, I believe it was around the time of the World Summit on Sustainable Development that was held in Johannesburg in 2002, where the US government made available online all of the global 90-meter digital elevation data from the Shuttle Radar Topographic mission, and help promote linkages to educational programs, flood modeling for disaster relief, and so on. And I believe that was probably one of the earliest initiatives of making a global geospatial data set freely available over the web. Sad to say it took 12 years to get the 30-meter data available, which happened just last year. Talk about bureaucratic resistance to change. Timing wasn't exactly quickly. So before beginning my talk, I'd like to personally congratulate Tim on his efforts in putting together Pivotal 2015, and knowing his track record, I'm quite confident it will turn out to be a seminal event, particularly if those of us here who have talent and ideas and energy help contribute to it. I want to say a few words first about my office and my position, because it's a rather unique position in that I do work in the government, in the State Department, which is the diplomatic arm of US government foreign policy, but my official responsibilities are rather limited. As Ruben said, I'm mandated by law to put forth policy on boundary guidance. If you actually go into Google Earth or Google Map, you will see at the bottom, you'll see the imagery citation, and then you'll see US State Department geographer, because they use all of our international boundaries. So if it's an international view, that's the view you'll see. And we work very closely with Google Earth and other agencies in sharing all of our information. We want to make it freely accessible. And so whenever there's a boundary dispute and there's an error in Google Earth's database, they're very quick to point the finger to the Office of the Geographer for some errors, because as we're moving into an era of digital precision, we're finding actually that most of the world's boundaries and lines on a map are actually not as precise as they could be. But I have a team that handles all of those duties very well, and that allows me to focus most of my time on my unofficial duties as the head of the Office of the Geographer in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, Department of State, where I lead a team of analysts that includes geographers and science fellows and foreign affairs officers and cartographers and imagery analysts and a variety of personnel detailed from other US government agencies, including the military. And although my office resides in the Intelligence Research Bureau, there was a title that was listed for my talk that originally that was a bit misleading. It said, I believe it was capturing intelligence for humanitarian action, and that's not exactly what I'm going to talk about. I've come up with a new title. First of all, I can't really talk about all of the intelligence that we capture, although I use the word intelligence with a small I, because most of what I work on in my office we refer to as soft power or smart power issues, sort of the touchy-feely environmental, human rights, refugee, climate change type issues. So as you see, I've renamed the title of my slide to be Digital Mapping and the Democratization of Geospatial Data, which I'll get to in the second part of my talk, and I think will be a good segue into Patrick Meyer's talk, because I'm talking about our efforts to try to democratize data from a U.S. government perspective in terms of the resources and assets we have at our behest, and I believe Patrick will be talking about more of the efforts that he's been working on in the field with a community of practitioners, NGOs, volunteers, and the like. So hopefully it'll work out well. And I must say that my job duties really fit quite remarkably well into the themes of Pivot 2015, open data, real-world context, visualized information. I design and implement field projects, many of which are geared toward creating open data to facilitate the open and transparent access to and ownership of information. I work very much in a real-world context with activities that range from devising logistics of relief deliveries to supporting HIV/AIDS monitoring to the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council, and a whole variety of other international diplomatic efforts that can be enhanced by geographic information to support data-informed decision-making. And I am pretty consumed with figuring out how best to present visualized information for decision support through the use of geospatial tools and technologies, which is really a fancy way of saying I make maps, and literally my office puts out thousands of maps a year. My current challenge, actually, in terms of the map-making side of my shop, is to figure out how best to present our products on new media, such as smartphones and iPads. It really is it's a different way of thinking about the product, a different way of visualizing it. You just can't take a static map and translate it to a phone or an iPad and have it have the same meaning. And the idea of getting a map to convey a picture and a story to a decision maker is quite challenging. I keep hearing about the new generation of policymakers that are upcoming that will be comfortable with social media and with digital navigation. But I must tell you, to this date, I will lose most of my senior policymakers in the U.S. government if I have to take them past one click on a map. I have a lot of people who are hawking their software to our office and saying, it's very simple. All you do is click here and click there. I say, stop, you've just lost my audience. So it's a real challenge when you have to quickly give an impression to someone who has to make a decision in real time. See if my clicker works. All right. About 10 years ago, we started what is a rather unique operation in my office when we realized, doing a lot of field work with the United Nations and NGOs in conflict situations, using geographic information systems to promote the sharing of information, that the U.S. government's information was quite stovepiped and we weren't talking to each other. So we had this concept of creating a unit that was an interagency U.S. government operation geared with providing unclassified information that could be easily shared through the web, through interface with the United Nations, with NGOs, with citizens, and that was the genesis of what we now have as a decade-long proof of concept called the Humanitarian Information Unit, where, as you can see from the slide, we try to leverage U.S. government data and information. We try to work with response communities. We try as much as possible to promote open data standards and platforms for sharing open data. We were very much focused on partner engagement as force multipliers for even the assets that the U.S. government has. And more lately, we have tried to take the lead on what we're calling geo-diplomacy. I'll get into that in a little while, and then I'm going to scoot over to the Youth Forum and talk to them about trying to encourage some geo-diplomats here from Australia. One way that our Humanitarian Information Unit has been successful is we do not negotiate MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings and Agreement with other agencies. We don't transfer information. We don't have tit-for-tat relationships. I find that given the wealth and the powerful assets of the U.S. government, we should be providing as much as possible freely building up situations of trust, and it's worked very well from us. And then if we do need some information from others, because we have a trusted relationship, more often than not, we can find information from various different partners as well. So I think that that's been a good template for effective action. But this is an example of what I like to consider my office does, that sort of traditional mapping support for the diplomats and policymakers at the Department of State. The example here is from Syria, but we produce, like I said, thousands of these products a year from subjects that include crisis mapping, border disputes, and the soft power issues such as Ebola mapping, HIV/AIDS programming, climate change, human rights monitoring and surveys. We use satellite imagery to design surveys in areas that are conflicted so we can get our teams in and out quickly. We have done work on human trafficking and wildlife trafficking to try to draw linkages between various different networks and criminal activities so that we can design strategies to disrupt the networks. And we do food security and water security analysis, including contributions to the recent national intelligence estimates. And I think the bread and butter of our work still remains complex emergency analysis and disaster response. We're gradually moving towards some more interactive types of maps with time sliders and on-the-go data changes and drilling down in scale into local areas with imagery support. But it's not really where our wheelhouse is. I think we're moving from crisis to crisis. Sometimes I feel like we're constantly chasing the next crisis, but that's what happens when you are working at the behest of our diplomats and policymakers. Scale, as a geographer, of course, scale is paramount to whatever we do. And I borrowed this from my friend Dan Suey from Ohio State University, who's actually spending the year in Washington, D.C. at the Kennan Institute on their citizen science program. And you can see here as the scale is moving at an increasingly finer scale of analysis, so that we're getting into the individuals, and even as some folks were mentioning earlier, into genetic mapping and the likes. And as Michael Roseman mentioned in his talk last night, we're mapping individuals, whether they be in shopping malls or in their own office space. So it's really incredible the growth in the technology that we have at our hands, and the work I do really represents just a small portion of this, mostly at the global, national, state scales. I had another point I was going to make about this, but I seem to have forgotten it. Let's move to the next. This is my representation of how I view big data. Right? Everybody is trying to figure out how to tackle big data, and what I'm usually interested in is good data. And it's hard to ferret from the noise the good data out of the big data. And in our rush a lot of times to fill in the map, I find that we're filling in a map with a lot of bad data. And if you look at what the best available data, if you try to take the acronym for that, you can look at best available data as bad data. And in fact, we are knowingly sometimes, in order to map at a finer scale, getting out-of-date data we know were never good in the first place. We're mapping ethnic tribal distributions in Yemen, for example, which we have a hard time getting any reliable current data. We go back to the 1950s, to the last census. We try to project it. The data were bad when they first existed, so we're projecting bad data into a scenario where we know it's changing. So we're in our rush to fill up the map with increasingly finer detail, I think we're sometimes we're doing a disservice to our science by mapping a lot of bad data. The point I was going to make in the previous slide just came to me now, and that is I've never seen anyone who is satisfied with the scale of analysis. If you get it down to the community, they want the block. If you get the block, they want household data. If you get household data, they want bedroom data. So one of our challenges is to try to figure out what the appropriate scale is for the task at hand. And that's something I work on all the time in terms of producing maps for our policymakers. And it's hard stuff. I just was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Boulder, Colorado with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where we brought climate scientists together to talk to geographers, and we found that even people from different disciplines and scientists had a hard time talking the same language, no less translating that information to policymakers. So this stuff it's not easy to try to translate complex information in a simple way for decision makers. One way that I'm going about trying to work on this hard challenge is we formed a worldwide human geography data working group. Now, I became the chair of this group mostly because the first session that they had to form it, I didn't attend, and so as usually happens when you don't go to a meeting, you're nominated and unanimously elected to chair a group. But in all seriousness, it was an intergovernmental. It started out as an intergovernmental United States group, and they realized that the U.S. government, primarily the defense and intelligence communities, could no longer capture the social and cultural information and content that we failed in capturing adequately in places like Iraq and in Afghanistan without partnering with local people, without letting the communities map themselves, if you will. It's not like you're mapping digital elevation data from satellites. You need to develop partnerships, you need to have communities get involved, and they're the ones who really understand their own cultural and social milieu, and to think that we can send someone for 6 months of Pashtun training and sit with some tribal leaders in Afghanistan and understand the challenges that they face in building their own communities, I think is a little bit naive. So we decided we would form a group and invite other governments, NGOs, United Nations organizations to contribute to providing various different themes related to what we call human security that require foundation data. And we've built this community over just the past 2 years. This slide's a little bit dense, but it shows the number of members, we call it. It's really people who are participating in webinars and thematic seminars we've had on topics such as food security, climate, infectious disease. When Ebola hit, we had a webinar on Ebola data, same for Nepal, and it represents our effort to try to move from a top-down to a bottom-up system of getting information. And this, when Cheryl showed her slide yesterday of the understand, what was it? Cheryl's she here? Understandoscope, yeah. I kind of smile because I've been promoting the fact that we need to build a satellite to collect human geography data. Now, this is euphemistically a satellite. I've presented this several times before, and people are coming up to me afterwards and saying, we can really build a satellite that can tell what language people are talking. I mean, we're not quite there yet, but the idea is that if we put the level, if we look at the level of effort and the amount of resources that governments put into building satellites to collect terrestrial data, we need to put the same level of effort and resources into collecting human geography data. In order to do that, we need to know where the priorities are, what the gaps are. We need to understand the scale. We can't try to map the whole world at once, and so we need to move from what I call a top-down to a bottom-up approach. And the methodology that I've been promoting in my office is indicated on this slide here, where we foster partnerships, we work with local communities, we promote ownership and sharing of data, and we've worked with crisis mappers and other communities to develop a system where we provide commercial satellite imagery for volunteers to draw to trace vector data, to populate OpenStreetMap, and then out in the community can provide more content in terms of what actually exists from the imagery-derived data, and then to figure out ways of sharing that data. We worked with the Department of Defense to develop a project for synchronizing disconnected information from the field in a project called ROGUE, Rapid Open Geospatial User Environment, which has become GeoShape, which is Geospatial Humanitarian Assistance and Partner Engagement. I'm really showing my government credentials by throwing these acronyms at you, but it's a way that disconnected participants can provide information and have it synced up with data provenance and metadata tracked all throughout the process. We're supporting OpenStreetMap and other organizations in terms of trying to promote and share imagery so that collaborative mapping can be done in various different fora. It doesn't have to be in the field. It can be in universities or in organizations with mapathons that are run. And we're working with GeoNode and other technologies, and the UN OCHA's HDX platform for sharing information in a more effective way across domains. And so I want to talk a little bit about a couple of projects that my office has initiated. One is on, we call Imagery to the Crowd, which led to a project we have called MapGive. And another one is a pilot project that is ongoing right now in Cusco, Peru, called Secondary Cities. The Secondary Cities project is based on the idea that there's a lot of attention paid these days to megacities and rapid urban growth, but in fact, most of the world's growth is going to take place not in megacities, but in proliferating secondary cities around the world. These are cities that actually have the poorest of infrastructures. They have squatter settlements that have never been mapped and charted. They have poor utilities, bad tax bases, and so we feel like that we can contribute to maybe a gap to fill by promoting digital data to not only provide more map data about secondary cities, but work with local partners and communities to try to empower them and sustain their development of cities that are undergoing rapid growth. So in Cusco right now, you can see all the building that's going up into these hills. Most of that is not actually listed in a census. The government doesn't provide necessarily services to them, and these are areas where you have higher degrees of violence, and we felt we could provide a service by filling in the digital map of these areas. And the way we do this is we have to get stakeholder input. We work with our embassy in Lima, which happens to be the regional environment, science, technology, and health hub for all of South America. We are working with the mayor of Cusco, who has provided his support. We are making sure that the communities will own the data. We are trying to use it in a way that builds capacity and sustainability with partnerships and champions. And we find that the universities, in many cases, in similar efforts we've had around the world, are often what we call islands of stability. In areas where you don't necessarily know what government ministry to work with, because each government may have a different organization that pays attention to geospatial. Maybe the Ministry of Mines, it may be the Ministry of Agriculture, maybe the military. But the universities, we find, if we support them and work with graduate students, that type of research can sometimes be sustained throughout somebody's career, at least throughout the course of a dissertation. We try to also partner with a U.S. university and a local university. So that's a project that's ongoing right now. And then the other project that we've been working on for the past couple of years is we launched as an official State Department flagship open government initiative just recently called MapGive, but it started out in a project we called Imagery to the Crowd, which is where we provide a tile map service that processes imagery into really dumb images that allow for the tracing of vectors onto high-resolution imagery by volunteers that can be sitting in their basement in Brisbane, not actually in the field in Nepal. And via the internet and volunteer mappers, we can really we can provide a force multiplier for mapping the types of crises that we first saw with Haiti, where you had a huge amount of imagery that was publicly released. Lots of volunteer mappers, but no way to manage the type of imagery in content that was coming in. And so we developed this tile map service where each of these squares in the matrix is designed to be mapped in 1 hour by a volunteer. When they're finished, they go into the database as a red block. If there still remain to be mapped, it's gray. We have verifiers that go in and mark it with green colors. Different agencies can participate, individuals can participate. And I think the key takeaway from this is in a way you're managing the crowd, because a lot of times it's sexy for everybody to work in the most damaged area as opposed to getting some coverage. So if once a square is mapped, somebody can't map that square and they have to move into a different square, that guarantees the coverage over a particular area. And there are different tasks that can be tasked out through the OpenStreetMap tasking manager. My office does the imagery processing part of this, and the tasking manager then can put out different tasks if they want to map roads or buildings or water supplies. And I just wanted to show you an example of the very first experiment we did on this, which was in mapping 10 refugee camps in 72 hours of Somali refugees in Kenya and Ethiopia. And what happened is we provided some process imagery. This was all that existed on the digital map at the time for a refugee camp that had a couple of 100,000 people, because where do you put refugee camps? Where there's nothing there. Does the Kenyan government want to map that area as an official resident? No. But still, you have thriving communities with markets and schools and health clinics, and by putting this out and letting volunteers just trace the roads in this case, you can densify this. And we did 10 refugee camps in like I said, 48 hours. We posted it all, both imagery and vector information, on our website and made it available. So this later we had a number of different experiments with a number of different agencies. Every one of these, I want to just make clear, is not my office doing it. It's enabling a whole host of partners: the American Red Cross, the UN, Patrick's buddies with the crisis map and the digital humanitarians, and USAID resiliency mappers, and so it's just we just provide the impetus in terms of trying to get volunteers to provide mapping. And the real challenge I have is how do we incentivize volunteerism? It's very easy when you have a Nepal earthquake. Everybody wants to get involved in mapping a crisis. So in that sense, it's easy. How is it paid for? It's very difficult for the U.S. government to go, particularly certain parts of the government, to go try to pay volunteers or NGOs to map areas which may be sensitive or have some local political implications. We've worked in areas like South Sudan, for instance, where the newest state in the world, where we were working with volunteer mappers and helping them with their census, and then when they got into the government's hands, they were reluctant to release a lot of the information to their own people because of sensitivities over refugees returning and pastoral lands for grazing and things like that. There's a lot of gaming. I wouldn't say necessarily gaming, but a lot of map parties and mapathons with groups like Missing Maps and others that universities are having map-offs that we will help organize and provide the process imagery. So the real challenge is how do we incentivize this in a non-crisis situation in order to try to really map the world in areas that really merit being mapped. And so what we have come up with is our MapGive project, and I have a little video I'm going to show, but we have, it's kind of funny, we have these some stickers that we hand out on MapGive, and I'll tell you a little story about that in a little while. But we've run about 40 of these from the State Department website, in its MapGive website. It's an ideal type of process for typhoons and hurricanes because you usually know when they're coming. So when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, we hadn't put a task out, so we had no pre-damage imagery, even though there was a lot of mapping done after the hurricane. A year later, when Hagaput was about to hit, there was a tremendous amount of pre-hurricane mapping that was done. Fortunately for the Philippines, it didn't really strike where it originally was thought to, so there wasn't as much damage. But it's ideal for situations cyclones and hurricanes as opposed to earthquakes, which we can't necessarily anticipate. And the amount of work that's being done by a variety of organizations in Nepal is astounding. And again, what my office has done is we find areas that we are told areas that are identified as needing mapping support, most damaged areas. We try to provide the image, serve it out on the OpenStreetMap server and let the mappers go to town. This is an example of one area that was done over one part of Nepal for the volunteer mapping community. Whoops. So just to show you the change in a short period of time of the power of digital volunteer mapping, what happened in Haiti with 640 volunteer mappers and 1.4 million edits to just 5 years later, where it's an order of magnitude greater in terms of what we're getting from the volunteer mapping community in Nepal. So finally, I'm going to, if you bear with me, I have a 3-minute video I'm going to show you that is on our State Department website, www.mapgive.gov, as to why you should learn how to become a digital diplomat.
In 2010, after an earthquake in Haiti, online volunteers became part of a movement that is creating a free and open digital map of the world.
In an emergency, you just need data from wherever you have.
It's important that the information is open and available to everyone, because some situations we don't know it's going to happen. It's a surprise.
What is remote mapping?
Remote mapping is sort of an interesting new phenomenon that's happened probably since about 2010 in Haiti. We saw a real push of volunteers coming online to help create map data where none existed before.
Map data helps humanitarian efforts, not just in a crisis. It helps communities like Kibera in Nairobi, Kenya, prepare, develop, and respond to needs at the local level. It's a big job, and not every place is mapped like we may believe.
Developing or establishing data is a very huge step in kicking off the process of changing things. And that's the point at which the maps become very useful.
When the typhoon happened, we realized that there were no good maps of the Philippines, that there needed to be maps so that our personnel would know where to go and what they would find when they got there. So we partnered with the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to help them and help us build out a base map for the Philippines.
Think of OpenStreetMap as Wikipedia for maps.
OpenStreetMap is a free and open map of the entire world. It's primarily edited by volunteers. We create everything in the commons. It's completely open, available for anyone to contribute to and anyone to use.
How do volunteers help?
The way that a volunteer can help is by looking at satellite imagery and picking out different predefined objects and saying, okay, I see a house, I can trace the edges of that house. I see a road, I can trace the line of that road. I see an edge of a forest, I can trace the edge of that forest.
MapGive is making it easier for new online volunteers to take those first steps in helping build an open, free map of the world and become digital humanitarians. Learn how to map in 3 steps. Get an OpenStreetMap account, practice mapping, then get connected with a task on the MapGive site. You'll get the skills to map. What you'll give helps communities around the world.
The value of the geographic data created in OpenStreetMap for humanitarian response has already been compelling. The amount of information that's been produced and the utility it has rendered to the humanitarian community is a game changer in humanitarian response.
For the typhoon response, we've had, I think, almost 1,600 volunteers do something like 4.5 million edits to the base map just for the Philippines. And those 1,600 volunteers represent some 3 to 4 years of dedicated mapping that one person would be able to do.
We're asking the question, what if there were more online map givers?
What can happen if we had 10 times the amount of volunteers, 50 times the amount of volunteers? How many areas could we map? How much good could we do in this process?
Let's find out how much good we can do. MapGive today.
Thank you. And just last month, we actually had our first mapathon at the White House, where we had a lot of kids from DC participating. It was a pretty exciting event. Thank you very much for your attention. I apologize if I went over time.